our second round panel here today, and that is Dr. Perry Dehan. Perry is a water resources specialist for the CSU Office of Extension and Engagement in the Western region of the state. He received his PhD in agricultural engineering and land resources from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and his BS in civil engineering from Colorado State University. His research program focuses on innovative irrigation technologies, sustainable water resources management, alternative cropping systems, and crop consumptive use evaluation. He's a lead research scientist at the WCRC, might have you translate the WCRC first. Excellent meeting then. Grand Valley in its role as Western CSU campus unit focused on water resources, cropping systems, and climate smart agriculture. So I'll hand over here to Perry, who will be introducing the panel, the second panel screen. Perry, it's a pleasure.
Thank you a lot. Going right here for the speakers, is that the best way to go? Well, thanks a lot, Nathan, for letting me join this panel. I really need to say, basically, just a long way of saying I'm the CSU water guy from the Western Slope, part-time farmer and deputy janitor of my research station. I have the pleasure of hosting a panel here on water stewardship and agricultural sustainability. And so, without further ado, I think I'm just going to turn it over to our panelists and say that what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through this, each individual presentation, a little bit of a transition. If you guys are thinking about what kind of questions you might want to ask, you just write them down and we'll hold that to the end. The first panelist I'm going to introduce is Paul Roche. And for those of you that don't know, Paul is the governor's appointee for the Colorado River Basin to the Colorado Basin Roundtable. He's been featured prominently in big news media outlets, Politico, I think you see in the New York Times at some point or another, or the Washington Post, I think it was. And this is, I like to kind of embarrass Paul because he really is. He was awarded Water Leader of the upcoming Water Leader of the Year by WICO. And basically, Paul is, just a humble guy, so I'm going to do the job of explaining that he's doing an extremely large amount of important work for the state of Colorado. And the first time I was ever on a phone call with Paul, he was describing this big project he was going to talk about, and I was texting my friend Aaron Gervison, who was also on this project, and I said, I literally texted him, I love this guy, exclamation point. And you'll see why Paul gets into this talk here, as he's going to tell us about water conservation program and a number of other water conservation approaches that we're looking at right now, playing the role.
Well, I can start talking while they're loading. I made the tech difficult to hear myself, so I apologize. Thank you very much, Dr. Cabot, for the introduction. Very kind. I think it's a little different. I'm a pretty simple rancher from just on the other side of Raviers. But the cool thing, I feel very connected actually to the Yampa River and the basin here. Both of my children were born here in the last 5 years. The steamboat. I had the one ski race I actually did pretty well at, swallowing the house mill back in the day. And my grandpa actually used to run people on the side. My great grandfather's brother split from the family homestead on the Front Range and came up here to the Yampa Valley, and his descendants are still over in Hayden. So I feel quite connected. So I have a ton of things to talk about, and I'm trying to stay within my time limit. Pretty simply, the group of ranchers and with the number of partners worked on a water conservation project related to agriculture going back to 2020. And this is what a hay meadow in Grand County looks like when you're not irrigating it, and some of the equipment that is in here, and I will explain later. This particular meadow is at about 8,000 feet, and the summer of 2020 with zero irrigation water supply, that normally is a very robust, lush hay meadow producing between 2.5 and 3 tons of hay per acre. So why would we ask ranchers in Grant County to drive their hay meadows for a year? In Grant County, we are the most heavily trans-basin inverted county in the state of Colorado. And so all these issues of water scarcity and supply that people are talking about now in, national headlines, news, in Grant County on the main side of the Colorado River, we felt this very strongly dating back to the early 2000s, drought of 02, 03, 04. We saw a river system unlike anyone had ever seen before. So the cumulative impact of all the ground-based diversions combined with drought, it was a river that no one knew what to do with. So the neighbors and I had very simply put, we couldn't irrigate. None of our diversion structures were set up for that low of a flow. To give perspective on that, the historical flow of the Colorado River at the confluence of Troublesome Creek, which is just about 4 miles east of Kremling. Historical peak flow would be the first week of June and peak over 6,000 CFS on average. And in 02, 03, as well as the last 3 summers, including this year, we have not seen the river flow over 180 cubic feet per second. So we rallied with the neighbors and wins the work. We built an awesome river project that continues on through this day. We've upgraded our systems. We feel like we're winning. We're doing what's necessary to adapt to modern times. We do that in partnership. Our trans-basin diverters are not our enemies. They're our partners, along with a number of other people. But that led to modern era demand management was the topic of conversation. The Colorado Basin Roundtable, which I was the ag rep to, started a work group. The state process through the Water Conservation Board had started their different work groups, and I participated in the Ag Impact Work Group. And my dear friend, Dr. Barry Cabot, was in the background talking to me about, we're having a lot of time talking about demand management policy, demand management, but the reality is that in the Colorado River Basin, in the state of Colorado, most of our irrigated ground is high altitude perennials, and we don't really know how much water we actually use. And there's a very wide range of different science and techniques to look at this, and we have to get to the bottom of it. So most of the folks in that room knew that my neighbors and I, and the reason I brought up that river project, we have collaborated in the past and worked on adaptation. And I think that they're very forward thinking, knowing these impacts of water scarcity in their lives. So going and pitching the idea of, hey, you want to drive a meadow for years, so scientists can come out with the property and do all this stuff. It actually wasn't that weird to them. And a number of the partners that worked on it, we have worked with the Colorado Basin Roundtable, we worked with the Water Conservation Board, we worked with the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited American Rivers, and more that I'm leaving out. But the concept of this was to see really what happens. So from the scientific side, most importantly, it was really an analysis of evapotranspiration, the total consumptive use. There were test fields, there were reference fields, and I should actually get to that as we're going. So this would be a test field, totally dried out summer of 2020. And what it looks like, we dried out just under 1,000 acres for the year completely, and then just under 200 acres. We looked at a deficit irrigation where the producer was allowed to irrigate until June 15th, and then as of June 15th, no irrigation supply for the rest of the season. From the scientific side of it, it's really this analysis of consumptive use, different techniques of doing that. Dr. Catlin would do a much better job of, but we have fancy things like getting covariance towers, which I tried to learn about a long time ago, and finally Barry just taught me that it's just a water molecule counter is a good way to say it. We have all these different enclosures of data loggers that are looking at soil moisture at different depths within the soil. We're taking volume forage samples, we're looking at forage quality, all these different things, but there's the consumptive use side, but then on the ag side of it, if there is, and demand management has not come online, it's in feasibility analysis, like it's been way longer than the entire session was talking about demand management, it doesn't exist. But the thought being that if there are forms of water conservation programs, whatever that looks like, that this science and this background would be important to know that. And so from the ag side of things, what really happens is we take perennial fields that we irrigate and we dry them out. What are the economic impacts to us? What happens with residual forage and how we manage with cattle herds, most of us are livestock producers. And then what is the recovery? You can imagine, pretty simply, if you don't irrigate your yard for an entire summer, when you go to turn the sprinkler system back on, your yard's probably going to look a little different than it does if you irrigate over here. So we wanted to know that and do it through a very robust analysis so that if we're talking about water conservation programs in general, we have more background information. So this is a normal handout in June and what it looks like relative to the other one. So this is not done at full growth yet. Late June irrigation production, but I think to look at the video before and after to understand the difference of what this looks like, whether it has water or not, is pretty substantial. There's the water molecule counter, the covariance tower that sits and remains in place. It's a 4-year project. So initially it was the test and the experiment, and now it's follow-up research to understand this as it goes. These producers to take on this risk in their own operations, and it so happens to be the summer of 2020, which I know all of our memories can be kind of short, but 2020 is not short in my memory. Locally, we had the Williamsport fire going on pretty much the entire duration of the summer, and then most of these project locations occurred within less than 10 miles of the Stewardship fire. And to give perspective on this, when I went into the grocery store when the producers started this, there was a gentleman that said that I was lunatic and that this was unnecessary and that I was doing negative things to the local Black community. And that same gentleman, late into the fall after the Stewardship fire had burned, he made it very clear that he apologized that the world was changing faster than what he recognized. But that all happened in one of the driest years ever. So one of the fun things about this project was, it's not just about, you know, when you look at irrigated ground and the lay of the land, it's not as simple as saying, well, a couple people just turn off head dates and dry it out and save water. In this particular case, there was a large producer downstream that wanted to participate, but somebody up that didn't. And so we had to figure out what to do with their tailwater, which is thinking this stuff through on a big scale is pretty fun. So in this pit, you can see the land right underneath where the drone is dried out, then it's lush and green and all filtering down to where there's that pond, and then it goes back to dry. So we literally corralled the tailwater of the upstream neighbor, turned it down to where that became the reference field, which is pretty fascinating. But long-term and short-term for this group, and in a shorter presentation, you know, I want you all to know that one of the reasons for this project, when we think about short-term, we have some very bad problems with Lake Powell and the Colorado River system. There's 40 million people that are running to a point where, you know, if you go to lower basin presentations and conversations, Deadpool with Powell and having a Colorado River that doesn't flow below Lake Mead, it's not out of the question at this point in conversation. And so we need to find ways as basins to work together to figure out how to solve this problem. The upper basin in the state of Colorado has always followed the legal rules and legal requirements of the system, and that's a conversation that I should leave for another day. But the reality is that we're all in this together, and we all are looking at this adaptation. The longer term of this is, can we think about doing things better? So when I talk about a Colorado River that used to flow through my family's property at 6,000 CFS at runoff in the middle of irrigation season, now we have 150 to 180 CFS. Are we growing the right forages? You know, back in the day at 6,000 cubic feet per second, most of that valley was just flooded and swamped out. They're very high water consuming plants. They require a lot of water to grow. It's what was there. That's not the reality anymore. So a very cool part of this project, in some of the meadows that we beat up, you don't irrigate for a year and it rains less than an inch all summer season, and then you put a pile of cattle on it. Some of these meadows look more like fields of dirt than fields of stubble. And so we seize the moment to look at, can we interseed different species of forage into a sod-bound condition meadow that promotes drought resiliency and can actually use less water. And that's what's so neat about this project that I look forward maybe more in the interaction question and answer. But we can read in textbooks about soil health and about different forages that use different volumes of water. But to do this test on 1,200 acres and actually look at it firsthand in the field and how that works is absolutely fascinating and I think very important. So some of our interseedings work very well, some of them did not. But it certainly got us thinking in different ways that if we have meadows that use less water than average of projects and produce more volume and yield of forage, and that volume of yield and forage has a higher nutritional value for livestock, you know, wouldn't we all be winning? And then looking at it where it gets more complex is what is the best management practice of actually getting from what we currently have, you know, to the other side. And so that's where today the project continues. As I said, it's a 4-year project, so technically by contract, the study will only go through next summer season. But as far as the producers involved in the project, we have overlap now, partnerships with the Land Institute. If you have not heard of them, they're based out of Kansas. I think some of their original goals were a little bit different than getting into water scarcity and 40 million people surviving in the Colorado River Basin. But some of the plants that they have, very deep rooting, very drought resilient, and perhaps plants that can survive years without water supply. Because some of this, when it comes to water, and we get talking about, you know, the deep, wonky stuff, you potentially have these programs that would be designed for water conservation. We also have one of my very good friends that lives south of Friendly, that has ranched there for a very long time. He is physically and legally #1 on the creek. Has never been out of water supply early in the irrigation season in the summer of 2020 and the summer of 2021. He did not have enough water to irrigate his own place. So that's not policy, that's real life. And so when I think of these things, I think of the potential impact to the system as well as local communities, but also just for individual ag producers about how we can adapt and survive in this changing time, which I think, at least to me, is very apparent, very real that it's happening when you're on the ground. Living through these conditions, it is a very real thing. So I want to allow the other speakers plenty of time to talk because I can ramble forever, but I look forward to robust Q&A. And this is some exciting stuff. And I will say one thing that builds me a lot of hope about this is that the partnerships and the way the state of Colorado is doing business right now internally, it does give me hope. Because if I look at this as an individual producer with the challenges that we face as an individual family and community, we'd have been gone and my neighbors would have been gone a long time ago. And we are thriving, we're working together, and we're doing a great partnership. So thank you very much.
So we'll get the other presentation loaded up and we can kind of sort of tie these together. So I'm familiar enough with the whole project to be able to describe it as a fundamental water conservation program. It's a short term, very big impact short term water conservation program dealing with reduced consumption use, ostensibly to deeper demand on the river, irrigation diversions. So we can dig into a little bit of that later, about measurements up there, and lots of water, we're looking at yield, and Paul talked a bit about the long-term kind of conservation programs, probably things before it is. But so for our next speaker, we're going to jump into the other component of the big water balance there, which is soil. And so I'm going to quickly introduce Christy Rockford and describe her numerous qualifications here. He is your district manager here for Routt County Conservation District, and he did grow up on a ranch. So in Idaho, 10 years of experience working with the NRCS, with the Navajo Reservation, Flagstaff, Arizona, and in Montana. So we love it here. And I'm really astonished that he didn't come up with the fact you say here, firmly stand on the belief that it all, you stand your ground on the belief that it all comes down to soil. All right then. So I'm going to turn this over to Chris, who's going to talk to us about the STAR program in the state and dig us into a look at the soil.
Okay, thank you, Terry. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank the steering committee for inviting me to attend and this event, and for all of their hours in putting together this wonderful event. And thank you. And I'm thrilled to sit on this panel with Christine and Paul and discuss water stewardship and sustainable agriculture, as well as what the conservation district is doing to help landowners build resilience in the face of changing water cycles. And I'll start with a brief history of conservation districts and then discuss our soil health initiative, our STAR program, the creation of a landowner toolkit of best practices, and future technology that can help us achieve our conservation goals. So as a soil scientist, I'm sure it comes as no surprise that I believe that it all comes down to the soil. And I also believe that soil health is a key to sustainable agriculture and the ability to use and hold on to our precious water resources. America's conservation movement is literally rooted in soil health. Created by the USDA in response to the 1930 Dust Bowl, conservation districts are local units of state government that utilize state, federal, and private sector resources to solve today's conservation challenges. We deliver technical and financial assistance to farmers, ranchers, forest stewards, and other landowners to voluntarily protect, restore, and enhance the natural resources of their land. The Routt County Conservation District was formed in 1942, and so this year we are celebrating 80 years of locally led soil and water conservation. In 2019, the Conservation District launched a soil health initiative to promote the benefits of soil health, and they are plentiful. To name a few, healthy soils have a high water quality capacity. They store carbon and nutrients in their soil organic matters. They provide good aeration and promote root growth. They reduce disease and pest problems. They reduce runoff and erosion. They protect water quality. And healthy soils are resilient to drought, heavy rainfall events, and temperature extremes. A healthy soil is like a sponge that's able to absorb moisture when it falls, whether it be a light sprinkle or a torrential downpour, you might have heard last night. While most look to the sky for drought relief, a wise landowner will look to the soil, and for good reason. Healthy soils capture and store much more water due to the increased presence of organic matter, which in turn increases the soil's infiltration rate and water holding capacity. Every 1% increase in organic matter results in as much as 25,000 gallons of available soil water per acre. A healthy soil with high organic matter can store 20 times its weight in water. So we are one of the first conservation districts to participate in the Colorado Department of Agriculture STAR program, which stands for Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources. And the Legacy Ranch is one of our 5-star participants and also a STAR research field. The CFU Ag Water Quality Program installed an edge of water field monitoring equipment in spring of 2022, which Christina will tell you more about here in a moment. And we're hosting a field excursion this afternoon out at Legacy Ranch at 2 to 4 p.m. if you'd like to join. So the STAR program is a voluntary, free, practice-based rating system, and it assigns 1 through 5 star based on the farmers or ranchers' promotion of the 5 principles of soil health by utilizing soil health promoting conservation practices like reduced or no-till, cover crops, prescribed grazing, soil testing, and many other best management practices. So the 5 principles of soil health are, first and foremost, keep the soil covered. You can't see a healthy soil because it's covered with a natural armor of living and decaying plants. Number 2, minimize soil disturbance. No tillage is ideal because tillage ultimately results in wind and water erosion, ponding water, soil crusting, and organic matter depletion. Number 3, plant diversity. As we all know, diversity is key, and it's always best to try and mimic nature and native plant communities. And 4, keep roots in the ground. The soil is alive with microorganisms that feed off the carbon in the plant roots, who in turn recycle soil nutrients that are then taken up by the plants. And number 5, integrate livestock. So much of the grazed plants get returned to the soil through manure. And this manure spraying takes place without tractor and diesel. For each of our 5 ag producers who participated in the STAR program, we collected soil samples in order to determine the soil's baseline health, from which we will compare the incorporation of these soil health promoting practices. So this is an example of a comprehensive soil test. And soil tests basically report what's happening in the land. So some of the challenges that we have witnessed so far have been with the timing of planting cover crops, and competing with bulbous bluegrass. So we have a lot of pastures and hay fields that have become dominated by bulbous bluegrass, which is an aggressive perennial that regenerates from its root system each year. So in an attempt to try and create more plant diversity, we no-till drill the cover crop into a few of these fields last fall and this spring. Well, unfortunately, last fall was warm, and that caused those cover crops to sprout, and then those young seedlings got killed when the snow came. However, our spring planted cover crop this year sprouted and has plenty of moisture and did quite well this summer. So thankfully, we had a good experience there. We are launching an education program with a grant that we received from the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District to create a Route County Landowners Toolkit for drought, wildfire, and soil health resiliency. The toolkit will be developed in 3 steps. Step 1 will be completed this fall and winter and involves conducting a vulnerability assessment by assembling a task force of landowners, ag producers, and partners. We'll also host 3 listening sessions throughout Route County where we will listen and gather the resource concerns and needs of the landowners. And then all of that information will be compiled into the vulnerability assessment with the NRCS and the district board and partner input. Step 2 will build upon that assessment to develop a toolkit at the start of next year. The toolkit will be divided into different land use, such as rangeland or forest land, and the resource concerns tied to that land, plus a list of applicable resource conservation practices that are tried and true in building drought, wildfire, and soil health resiliency. So then next spring and summer will be step 3, and that's the dissemination of the toolkit, which we will share in an Esri storybook format. And additional outreach and education will occur through 3 field days all throughout the county that will demonstrate the best practices listed in the toolkit. And lastly, a summary report will be presented to the district and the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy, and many thanks to them for helping us fund this toolkit. Now, in an effort to build soil health on rangeland, which is a little bit tricky, we are very excited to dabble with virtual fencing. And there was a great article written in the Vail Daily a week ago, and then in our local paper, the Steamboat Pilot, first of this week, about a virtual fence project that's taking place in our neighboring county to the south, in Eagle County. So for those who may not be familiar, virtual fencing is like a dog, electric dog fence. So the cow wears a collar, and radio towers are placed strategically on the ranch, high elevation points, and they can reach up to a 12-mile radius. The towers provide a signal to the callers, to any livestock wearing a collar, and the rancher can delineate pastures or paddocks on their phone, on their computer, on a software program. And so the cow will hear an audible sound as they're approaching a geofence. And it'll get louder and louder, and eventually they'll get shocked if they cross that fence. But the cows get trained and they learn. This is my paddock, this is my area, I graze here for this many days, and then eventually I move over to that paddock, and it's a really wonderful system. So the technology is amazing as it will allow a rancher to employ a prescribed grazing plan without having to build and maintain fence to rotate cattle from pasture to pasture. And not to mention the wildlife benefit of not having to try and cross a barbed wire fence. I mean, nobody likes to see the pictures of wildlife tangled up and dead in barbed wire fence. So the strategic use of grazing animals is a way to optimize the water cycle on a ranch. So what is prescribed grazing? It's a prescription, it's a strategic plan that moves cattle from one pasture or paddock to another to allow for the maximum benefit of grazing pressure, to promote plant regrowth and carbon sequestration without overgrazing sites. So herd animals are Mother Nature's lawnmowers who can help promote the sequestration of carbon through careful and sustainable grazing practices like prescribed grazing. 2 additional benefits that may not be so obvious are the ability to quickly move cattle away from dangers such as wildfire and wolves. One of our conservation district board members is a rancher in South Route County, where the Colorado Parks and Wildlife have determined is the best place to reintroduce gray wolves. And he shared with the board the other day how he felt the technology, this virtual fencing technology could be used to help direct or move his herd away from where the wolves are located, because when they reintroduce the wolves, they intend to put collars on some of those wolves as well. And that is scheduled to take place by the end of next year. They reintroduce those wolves. Another benefit is wildfire. Last April, there was a wildfire in Eagle County. And the rancher that was taking part in that, the virtual fencing demonstration project used the technology to basically call his cattle in, where then he was able to load them up and haul them off to safety. And with that, if you'd like to learn more about soil health, I encourage you to visit our website, routecountycd.com. It contains tons of information and tons of resources to learn more. That's it for me. Thank you.
So again, board of presidents, we're thinking about soil, water, plant, soil interactions, so we can get into our sustainability, water stewardship, conversation when we're done with our last panelist, which is Christina Well. So Christina is a colleague of mine at Colorado State University, and her background is in water diplomacy, and so she's wanting me to make you aware that when she learned agriculture was the biggest water user, she started to shift working with the ag community around water management issues. Presumably because that's like the easiest form of water diplomacy, and there's no politics. No peril at all involved with water diplomacy. But she's thankfully been with the Ag Water Quality Program for 3 years, and had also spent time with the Nature Conservancy. And so right now she's working on a PhD program to research water management decisions under extreme uncertainty. And her working theory is a better understanding behavioral science to facilitate informed water policy and the decision. So let's hope that science carries the day here, and that more people understand the better decisions we make. So we're going to turn it over to students to talk to us about the Ag Water Quality Program.
Just 1 second. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I am so excited to be here. Thank you all for having me here. I feel really honored to be just surrounded by all of you very smart individuals. I actually am really excited to be here as well because I lived in Steamboat for a year of my life, and it's the year that I refer to fondly as the best year of my life. There's a lot more to come, but I am familiar on a basic level with this season. I'm really excited to bring you the work that we're doing right now from CSU over here. And so far, we found a really collaborative group of stakeholders over here, and that just drives the further collaboration on our end. So I'm happy to be here. Overall, I'm just going to do a quick program overview so that you all can walk away knowing exactly what we do and why we're here. And then I'm going to spend a little more time on our water quality and dust management practices that we found to be effective. Some of the barriers and some of the things we found to be working for the ag community. I am a social scientist by nature, so I will touch on the outreach part too, and then just some general takeaways. So our program was established in 1990 by the state legislature that passed a bill specifically to look at groundwater ag chemicals in the groundwater. And we focused on groundwater for about 20 years, and we were doing so well with that. They decided to surface water in 2019, where our program triples, and we now started sampling surface water and groundwater. And the unique thing about our program is that we are funded on a state tonnage cap of fertilizers and a pesticide registration fee. So it is the producers themselves that are paying for our program to exist. And because of that, we are very producer centric with everything we do. here. There's two branches of the program. The first branch is the Colorado Department of Agriculture, which is housed in Denver. And they go around and sample the surface and groundwater for each basin, take the samples back to their lab, run it through a suite of 130 different pesticides they test for. And then they put all this information is publicly available online for you all to look up if you'd like to. This particular map, this is all of the data for the history of the program, not just 1 year's worth of data. Those orange kites are what we came up with above the EPA drinking water standard. I do want to point out that here in SEMA was 1998, that was a little dot you see over nearby us. So it's been a while since they sampled over here. Alrighty, we're gonna skip over the funding, but I'm happy to talk about that at the end. I'm gonna save, I was inspired by Paul's talk, which was a lot more interactive and storytelling. So we'll save more time for storytelling. Our particular branch of the program is that second half of CSU, where we focus on BMP, best management practice, validation and demonstration. So we work with the researchers at CSU to see how effective these practices actually are scientifically. And the beautiful part about this is that we do the research and then we are actually able to translate it to policy as well. So every year, let me back up just a little bit. So in 2012, Regulation 85 was passed in the state, which specifically regulates nutrients in water for point source leaders. Ag falls into the non-point source category, and so for ag, they're just recommending a voluntary incentive-based program. And because of that, we report to the Water Quality Control Commission annually, and they give them an update on how that voluntary program is going. And long story short, it's going pretty well. We found that there's a lot of producers that are really motivated out there to not only improve their practices, but it just makes sense for them to have a sustainable farm. Soil health is important for productive crops. And so those two things line up. Here's another story map of our, I know we saw one earlier today, but this is the story map of all of our sites. It's important to us, like Kelly touched on earlier, she mentioned how complex every single river basin is, every single one has a compact on it. And so ag is really different wherever you are in the state. Water quality is really different wherever you are. And so we're trying to give a nice geographic spatial representation of that with our program, and we're always needing to expand that. As for our work here in Route County, we have 3 main projects going on. The first one Kristen mentioned is with the STAR, supporting the STAR program of the Legacy Ranch. And that picture that you see on the left-hand side, that is our low-cost water quality sampler. The research grade water quality sampler is about $10,000. And we developed this baby through a grant from NRCS for about 1/10 of the cost. So about $1,000, and it is all DIY. You can build it yourself with parts that you find at Home Depot. And this has really allowed us to expand our monitoring network around the state. It doesn't analyze the samples, but once the water hits the plume, we have a little monitor in there, and it'll text us and say, you want to take a sample? So either a rain event or an irrigation event. And we can text back to this little machine to say yes or no, depending on where we're at in the season and if it's a sample that we want to collect. And it'll take a sample whenever we tell it to, and it'll store it in that little cooler, and then we can come by, pick it up, and then bring it to the lab for analysis. And so that simple technology that's now pretty low cost has enabled us, really to expand. I think, the other thing I was going to say about this is there's been a lot of talk of the water quality soil health nexus, and I just wanted to spend a little bit of time diving into that a little bit more. Water quality and soil health definitely affect each other a lot. And in general, when you have healthy soils, you have good water quality for the reasons that Kristen was mentioning with the infiltration rates. You have higher aggregate stability when you don't fill, when the soil just sit there. And we are actually we have a PhD student who's trying to draw the exact correlations between nutrients in waters, nitrogen and phosphorus specifically, and then the plant available nutrients in the soil, and then also all of the other basic soil properties. So organic soil carbon, soil density, aggregate stability, pH, all of it. And so that work is just starting, and but we're excited to see where that goes, see what we're gonna pull out of that. What brought us up here a couple of years ago, other than the fact I love it here, is they're having some issues with algal blooms in Stagecoach, and so we started water quality sampling. We started last year at 5 sites along above Stagecoach and below Stagecoach. This year, we're doing the same 5 sites, and we added chlorophyll A to the suite that we're testing for. So that data should be available in December or so. All right, and then the last project, which I'm really excited about, is our Mountain Meadow hay production out here. This is the story time that I was mentioning. We are working with a producer up here for this project that just got started last year. And the first time we met him, we just shook his hand, he pointed us in the right direction. We went to go figure out where we're going to install the equipment. He went off to go brand cattle. It was a busy time for him. And then we came back a few months later with our crew of undergraduate students to install the equipment. And he spent a lot more time with us, asking us exactly what everything does, what we're doing with the data, what we're collecting, what he has to do. That answer is nothing, because he's providing plans. And then we discussed some ideas, and really outlines kind of the boundaries around what this grant funding can pay for, possible things that have been in the past, and then we let that sit. And I came back just this week and to grab our lab samples, and it was great. I ended up sitting in the farm for like 4 hours and listening to all the ideas he had about stuff that he wants to do on his farm. And when we talk about building projects and building trust, I feel like this is kind of the way to do it. We are not in any means telling him what to do. He has had time to think about it. He's had time to think about what he's curious about. And it was really neat to see if he knows exactly what his groundwater table is, where the low parts are, what he's doing, what he wants us to put in anemometers to see how the groundwater is moving under his field. We can do that. And the filter strip idea was his idea also. So he wants to fertilize most of his field, but leave part unfertilized so that it's going to hit a clean patch of grass before it goes to the paper. And just really hearing that and just kind of facilitating it, it's been amazing. And I also just wanted to bring up on this point that it's important when we look at these relationships to see where these producers are starting. Because I think there's kind of an assumption that we could be doing so much more. And really, we found that a lot of them are doing a lot already. And so when you look at the baseline for where they're at, this particular producer is doing 4 out of 5 soil health practices that Kristen talked about. Cover crop, he's growing hay, so he has roots in the ground all year long. The soil is undisturbed completely. His cattle grazing practices is the best that I've seen. His pastures are beautiful, and he does a really great job with electric fences for rotating them. And then the fifth one, the one that's arguable that he's not doing, is the diversity of the plants, because he's growing hay. But I bet he would argue that there's enough weeds in there. Maybe cut that. So we might have that one covered too. So I just think when we talk about like specifically how we're measuring change, it depends a lot on where they're starting. So the assumption is people are starting down here, but in this case, these are starting here. So when you measure change, the change you're going to see in the water quality is already going to be less, perhaps, than in another place. I'm going to skip that one. I've already been talking too much. Just for those of you who are not familiar with how filter strips work, it's kind of the quick and dirty of how they work in an ideal situation. So you have the crop on the upper left hand side. We're able to funnel all the water into one point so that we can measure volume, so that we can measure concentration of the nutrients and pesticides. And then we spread it out again. We have a sheet flow across, in this case, the grass perennial strip, then concentrate it down into one point. And same thing. And you can see that the bottles on the lower corner over there. The bottle on the left is the water entering the filter strip. And the bottle on the right is what's leaving. So you can just see that the TSS has been solid. There's a huge difference. And we found this really strong correlation with phosphorus specifically for the filter strips because phosphorus attaches to sediment. So you can see the sediment in that water. And so that we found this to be not only pretty inexpensive, but like pretty easy to implement. It's not a hard ask for a big amount of water difference. Let's get that one. Outreach, yeah. So we have found, I actually started this outreach position right as COVID started. It was a little bit rough, but we have found for what we communicate and how we communicate it, it really varies. And you need to, overall have the same message, but we have scientific publications, we have these overall just BNC publications for crop specific practices. But then we also started social media this year, which we had to hire a student to explain to us. But that's been going quite well. And yeah, and we've also just found video views are a really great way. As you saw from Paul's presentation, it's a great way just to see like what's going on. And so really quick snippets of drone footage has been pretty effective too. And then the field demonstration days for producers talking to producers and asking each other questions that I never would have thought of. So that's also we found to be great. We put out a ground survey across the state in 2020, asking producers and ranchers what their biggest needs were for information to help them do the job. And as you can see here, we have a top 3 prioritized list of the information that they're asking for. And so we took this and wrote a grant and got the grant. And so now we're going to be developing outreach materials specifically catered to what they're asking for. I don't know if any of you have been on CSU Extension's website, but it's a bit of a black hole. It's very difficult to find anything that is useful when you want it. Sorry. Yeah, we're in the process of fixing it, and so this is also gonna help that a little bit. So information they're asking for in an easy to find way. All right, in summation, there are tons of water quality issues that can result. I have to put something by. So we can stick to the other points. So overall, what I was going to say for this is that there's a ton of people modeling nutrient transport already, and there is not a lot of data to calibrate those models. And our organization is really the only one in the state looking at non-point source pollution for ag chemicals. And so every piece of data that we collect, we use to help calibrate these models. But the people using these models are going to use them to make decisions whether or not we're calibrating them. So that's a big why it matters kind of point. And a good place to start overall with collaboration is really asking producers what their needs are and what their concerns are, and then forming a plan kind of based around that. Because I found that their risk margins are small, like they don't have a lot of room to mess around and find out what's going to happen. And so the more we can provide financial incentives to help them do that and play around, the better. And then also, like Alan mentioned, there's really no one size fits all situation, especially when it comes to ag and those practices. The mountain meadow hay production is usually flood irrigated, but also as I was looking at this producer's field, trying to put a pivot on the field would be pretty impossible. The topography, the shape of the field is not at all circular. There's a lot of, and so up here, it's going to take some more conversation, some more innovation to find solutions that are going to work specifically farm to farm. So, yeah, I think that's it. Thank you all.
Q&A here. Maybe it's positioning us to that part of it. I want to say this is kind of work he does is not easy work. Hopefully, my original he was acting on it, it's still monitoring. It's a true story. Where's the best way to put it? Before we have those control, when you got to buy all that stuff, right? I figured I'll just go on there and see what's bridge. Close off section E, rate like roll, set my system up, refrigerate this temper, pressure to $10,000. True story. Month later, after the collecting data, front driver, driven off the road, was destroyed by the research station. Don't put your research station next to a road. Up your home. Be really difficult work to do and get those kinds of installed. Just to kind of raise it up a little. I think that when I look at this, sort of the unifying theme really of this panel was that you've got people that are directly working with or are themselves working on the problem solving people, looking at solutions to our sustainability challenges. Don't know about what we call it quantum. So, I think maybe that's a good place to jump off and maybe get some Q&A going. So I guess you all are thinking about your own questions. But I'd like to put questions to all of you. You can use whatever order you want. But when you think about the program's success, you've got a lot of enrollment in STAR, you've got a lot of enrollment in the ag water quality program, Paul's done a great job in the folks involved. I mean, when you see the shape now, I mean, when I was doing my work, it's literally like ready to go with something out the I put a bunch of stuff on the why are we here? I want you around really and they don't much. I got something going, but now there are so many producers that get involved in the program. And just as a kind of getting science and folks have no problem. Now, but I'm really curious to know what do you think is driving the level of interest that we are seeing now with this kind of collaboration, whether it's on STAR or on something, which one do you want to tackle that question?
Well, I think that in agriculture, we kind of are the front line to what is happening with climate and water related scenarios. And I think that it would be pretty impossible to be in the corner of the state and not have seen a pretty drastic change over the last 20 years to anybody's operation. I also think that within the ag community, we have the ability, that's what we do month to month, week to week, year to year, is adapt to adapt. We can make a plan for what's going to happen on a given ranch or a given farm, but natural precipitation, commodity prices, name it, price of fuel at the beginning of the spring, all these things change, what we do. So we're very innovative people. And I think that we see what's coming. And my hope long term is that when it comes to the water scarcity challenge in general, that agriculture is front and center at the table, helping to create these positive solutions.
Turn this on or?
Should be on, right?
No, it's not.
One thing that I noticed with our STAR participants is that they are well-read, well-researched. I can tell they spend a lot of time learning regenerative agricultural practices. They're very well versed in that, and they are naturally inquisitive and wanting to implement some of these practices that are not your usual suspects, that you would see in the Young Valley. So that's one thing that I see similar with these STAR participants. And then the wonderful thing with that is that's all you need. You just need those first few folks who have that curiosity and want to try something different. And then you'll have all the neighbors looking over the fence. Oh, let's see how this works out for her. Or let's see if his field really improves by doing all these different things.
And so once you have that over the fence effect, working in a positive direction, and then it just dominoes. And then a lot of other folks will jump on board. So fortunately, we have the STAR program to help set up and start that incentive. We have inquisitive farmers and ranchers who are wanting to try things differently, and hopefully our work will just continue from there.
So if I can just kind of ask like a follow-up to your presentation, and this is something that I don't know how many folks here follow the whole sort of discussion is on my own, you are involved in it, but it's not a natural connection to think about. So like we hear the term soil health, I believe originated from West colleagues and sort of grew out of the those movements. And that has grown, and then when we kind of got to the West, we started seeing this integration of soil health as a pathway to a water conservation strategy, let's say. That's not a naturally intuitive link until you start talking about changing the water holding capacity and other things like that. But could you just kind of just, talk about, maybe don't, you don't have to run all the 5 principles, but draw a line for us between soil health goals and how those actually do result in what you might call definable water conservation. I did this, and then we see this result, such that we can justify using essentially water money to do soil programs, which is kind of emerging in Colorado. Can you help make that link for us?
Yeah, for me, the soil testing that we did, the comprehensive soil testing, I personally, I'm a little biased. I love that kind of data. It's really important to me to see what is our existing percent of organic matter content. Where are we starting with? And then as we incorporate these practices, it'll take a while. It'll take years. In an irrigated cropland situation, we might see results happen a little bit faster. In a dry land or a rangeland situation, it's going to take years. But if we can monitor over time with these soil tests, the amount of microbial population in the soil through the carbon dioxide respiration rate, through the percent organic matter, through all those results that are coming out of that testing, we can then validate, yes, by using prescribed grazing and rotating cattle through and applying pressure where it needs to be applied and then taking away and allowing it to rest. So taking these practices that we know are beneficial and then have something like a soil test to be able to validate that. I'm hopeful that will, that'll provide the proof that's needed for other landowners to say, oh, okay, now I can see this can happen. So, there's that scientific aspect of being able to validate what these practices are doing. And it'll just take some time to develop that data and that proof to be able to show. In the meanwhile, hopefully, they'll be able to look over the neighbor's fence and see it right there, see the condition of the land. And so that's kind of my best way of trying to tie that end to prove the benefit of the soil health. It can be seen in the soil testing itself, and then also on land, landowners can tell.
So one of the fields, the STAR field is also utilizing water quality in the field. Is there a relationship between the data that Christina that you're gathering and the program that allows, we have the inflow of clean water coming in, and then we've got the second, is there a goal to try to relate some of the practices under the STAR program to the impact that we're seeing on the edges of the water qualities?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That is the end goal, and that is what Tad, our graduate student, is doing right now. It's exactly that. He's trying to tie what we see in the water quality with what we're seeing in the soil, and that includes infiltration rates, that includes all of the soil properties. But yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah. So how quickly do you think infiltration rates can change over time? In order to begin utilizing this soil sponge to make our irrigation more efficient?
Yeah, I think it's gonna really depend on how degraded the soil is and what you're doing to it, what kind of cover crop you have. I don't have a solid answer off the top of my head, but.
I'm surprised if you did. I know that these processes do take time, so we probably see you spend all this money we're on. You really can't change soil organic matter overnight.
Absolutely.
It's the wholesale change in the soil infrastructure. And so I'm gonna let Paul maybe jump off of that and talk about something you were trying to do in Grant County, that is about really trying to modify the soil itself long term.
Well, I think that, at scale on larger amounts of ground, I like to think of it as a pretty simple process where it really starts with the forage that is growing, and then what sort of patterns of grazing and utilization for harvest and hay, and how you're looking at that. That over time, then the balance of that ultimately leads to the soil. The way that I look at it is, the forage itself is the first line of defense, and then we're building into longer term soil practice. And that's, our, I became best friend with this amazing gentleman who's helping us a lot, but maybe a very simple comment is that not all perennials are created equal. And it doesn't matter because it's not just about the water use for anything else, it's also then about how animals will utilize that forage type of meadow and build on top of that. And I also would like to take a minute to, instead of the stage today, on Tuesday, the Colorado Water Conservation Board awarded grants to Colorado Ag Water Alliance for $183,000 in the partner match. They have over $250,000. It was discussed at the March board meeting that while there's historic funding opportunities, federal and state, there's all this stuff going on. It still seems that there's all these ideas in agriculture, but unless we really work through what a project would look like, how do we start this idea that if someone has an idea, think of it as like an incubator grants that they need to take to the next level. It's not success guaranteed, but like it's built into that program, whether it's looking at a forage type change where you're not confident with what type of soil you have or an irrigation practice, that if it doesn't, I don't have a circle meadow sitting up here on a hillside, but I'd like to see some efficiency what we do. And so the grant will be operated through Colorado Ag Water Alliance. It is intended that if you have an idea, call Greg Peterson and the Colorado Ag Water Alliance, and let's get the ball rolling. The number of partners in the advisory group that sides to this is incredibly exciting because whether Greg can self-manage or depending on what sort of ask it would be, is deliberately intended to be funneled through different organizations that have specific expertise within that. And so your local communities, the roundtable, state process, everything else, is hoping that this can build for them, whether it's an application to Water Conservation Board, to the NRCS, to the local conservation district. To build on, but it really is an ag incubator grant is really what the original concept was. It's there. So if people have ideas, we're hoping this stimulates a world opportunity for agriculture in the state.
I have one more question, and I do want to depend on the audience here to jump into this conversation. But in Christina's survey that she mentioned, Paul, we saw that number one alternative crops being of interest to producers. Response, alternative feeds for livestock producers. And so for me, that's always kind of a conundrum where, I'm not a producer of the research farm. I try not to grow anything I can't sell. So you've got this conundrum of number one, alternative something broker, but then there's no market for it. And so it sort of puts out the question, who really takes the lead on this issue of alternative crop grower? Is it the producers that we need them to do their own research and say, like, I know you guys create a market. Is it just now showing me how to grow it better? Or is it people like us that come around and say, here's this whiz bang new crop, and boy, if you just grew it, all the problems would be solved, that's often what happens, right? Is we show up with new crops, but there's no market. So everybody wants an alternative, but how do you actually get the ball rolling on that? There's no market. Is the market need because the science is there, or is the science following the market? As a real producer, you walk into this.
Yeah, it's super easy to answer because Walmart can't figure that out, I'm sure I can find it somewhere. So I was on a panel while ago with the sustainability of Walmart and what kind of fascinating, they went through examples of what they do. Different organic food at low cost in the store and see how that compares to selling organic O's to Cheerios as an example or something like that. And it's still a point where they struggle because consumer wants brand recognition, consumer wants what I buy, this is how it happens. So there's definitely a role within the consumer and how we're thinking about this. We're looking at our food in a through lens of sustainability, not just as a water crisis, but also soil throughout the world. But then there's also these limitations in the marketplace. So Planning Institute and currently is a really wonderful example. It's a perennial wheat crop as a substitute for wheat. They have rolled out different locations globally at a relatively small scale. There's niche markets for it, Patagonia for baking themselves some pasta and some beer and things, primarily been used in different brewing processes. It's a really exciting process because it's super deep rooting, doesn't need a lot of water, and can stand very robustly through drought conditions. It also happens to be a very good forage value for livestock. And so what we're thinking on this, we want producers to accelerate for long term in Grand County, Colorado, when we do not have any grain facilities. I don't think there is a combine in Grand County. I'm pretty positive that we have to go 2 hours in some direction to find a combine. So looking at that, that's the long term for us as the profit in grain. That's what we take a long time to build into because we have to have the sort of volume. We're then coming in and building infrastructure necessary. And Commissioner of Agriculture, Kate Greenberg, is really looking at that and working with our department back on what these local food systems look like. But I see that as a 10 and 15-year project. But if we can find these cross sectors, meanwhile, if we're not necessarily selling the grain, we still have a very high forage value for our livestock for what we need. And we can be developing the program through that and then growing with other producers in that kind of capacity, then there would be volume that's necessary for those kind of facilities. It's great, but I think it's a matter of trying to find win-wins that can vary over time to where you build to a certain capacity. But then it's also, how we get that message out to consumers that, understanding our food sources and where they come from really matter. Because ultimately we can grow the best stuff in the world, but people don't buy it. We're not in business.
Let's do this, people. We've got some questions, sir.
Yeah. Christine, I guess so. In that, I don't know about Grand County, but Route County came to the Pearl water meeting about turning off and turn closed. And so that with the, I guess with drying up the field was there any study or looking at the effects of that down, downstream and then turn flows, I guess. And then on top of that, for Christina, the water quality monitoring, are any of your groundwater buckets with mixed water quality and I'm not flood system?
Turn flow from Grand County impacts.
I know, I love it. Marketplace food systems followed by return flows. I like to think of it as a higher level return flow conversation. When I first started participating in this in 2012, it really was one side of the room, the other. You need my return flow. You need vision. We're all going to fight on this. It's very interesting because Colorado River Valley, the riparian corridor, the headwaters of Colorado River between Trans-Basin and dams, it wouldn't be a riparian corridor without flood irrigation. And when we think about some of the benefits and positive things that creates, the division of conservation, timing of the return flows, the total ecology of the riparian corridor is very important. But with the irrigation systems that take water 18 miles in a ditch, on a bench in a random place, and flood irrigation that may not be the best way to use water in scarce environment, and opportunities are available to create efficiencies. So I don't think it's a one-way conversation. What it really means, low-tech hydraulic, yeah, they are doing robust analysis of what happened with our project. Unfortunately, because of some of the behavior of other neighbors around some of the site, actual physical, understanding of what happened at the timing of the current flow, we had some challenges on that. The modeling itself is really working on that, hugely. The reality of it is that even with 1,200 acres of guideline participating in this, especially the land that participated in the Eastern Colorado River, you know, it's kind of a drop in the bucket to the whole system. It's just keeping those immediate responses, pretty challenging. But I think that what it did is stimulate a certain creative budgets where further modeling is being done.
I can just sort of follow up on this and say that it's such a good question, and you look at, you know, some of the, like the work we've done in Arkansas, it's heavily driven by return flow, and then the Republican movements and the impacts of sprinklers out there affecting the groundwater. You know, nobody wants to hear this, that this is a good forum to say it, and in order to get a good piece on that, you really need to do a significant amount of a robust watershed model. And you have, but the modeling tools exist, you know, I swing that, you know, my arms and CSP would probably find somebody that can model a river base, because that's what we excel at doing. Unfortunately, the funding structures that we work with are often not significant enough. There's not enough funding. You literally have to devote, like I would say, a postdoc or a specialized person to model that river system to get the appropriate amount of data. Of course, it can be done, it can be understood better. I mean, I already know where here's all models are wrong, but some models are useful, right? We would like to see us get to the point where we have useful models that people can use that all looking at the same information and make a decision on. So taking an unsatisfactory answer, but we've been always looking for the right kind of program that gets us into that $500,000 level of funding, which is not a lot of money to tackle such an important question. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there.
And just a really quick comment, sorry, you know, the importance of this kind of numbers and things ratcheting down, it's amazing how many gaps there are. And so at the very point, you know, the better science and data we have, the better we're going to do possible decisions. So it's very important topic.
It used to be the case that we couldn't get level temperation data, but that was a big component of working through the water balance. But now, because remote sensing has become much more available, those tools and that data, we can get that much greater availability. The technology is improved. We have a pretty good handle on some use numbers. And then you got the diversion numbers, and then it's a question of just getting, you know, more of the seamless, you know, cheap, low flow samplers all over out there to lock up the water. So I think that the time has come to have that conversation about it. If this is infrastructure, you know, why are we have to treat it like infrastructure? I'm sorry, I jumped your line of question.
Yeah, just to answer the question from my end, we are not looking at, I know that it maybe seems like that, because they just said we're going to put in PBRs to look at which way the groundwater is flowing, but that is a very, that scale is just a hard scale. And I think what you're talking about with groundwater return flows to the river, that second Terry's comment, but that would be a much bigger study. And I do think, I don't know if Andy's still here, but I know he talked to somebody from USGS who has an idea of isotope tracing on ways that you could do that fairly simply with the model. And so that might be just someone to follow with, because he just had that conversation last week. So yeah.
I think I
Great
saw
question.
another person. Okay, back in the back. And what's your name?
My name's Haley Benigno. I currently work for Yamatico, which does environmental education. And I used to work in the waste sector with the carbon farming project down in Boulder County, where they were taking kitchen waste, farm waste, and applying that as a soil amendment via compost through A1 Organics, which was as until I think next year there might be a compost facility in Denver, but it has been the only Front Range municipal compost facility taking all the compost for the Front Range. And so they were in this carbon farming project trying to apply and measure, you know, soil organic matter and soil carbon at a small scale, actually, a citizen science scale in Boulder County. To see over time if we have, changes in water retention and soil organic matter percentage. So I'm just wondering, and I'm fascinated with circular economies, it's cheap to trash things, but we have a waste problem, obviously. And so I think we can take this sphere of the waste stream, how do we start reusing things and being resourceful in the waste world? And I think there's an obvious connection there with agriculture and soil and how those two can be merged together. So I'm wondering if in your field of, or your sphere of influence, have you all researched, heard of, seen of any of these soil tests being done with, I'm thinking of municipal and animal waste streams of compost and soil amendment, and how that might be applied on a large scale in the agricultural world. Thank you.
Christine, you want to tell us how compost fits into the five principles?
Well, I will be upfront, I'm not familiar with a lot of that work being done in the Yampa Valley, and in my experience, I haven't had an opportunity to work with that personally, but I have spoke to folks who have, and a dear friend of mine is the state rangeland management specialist for the state of Colorado Natural Resources Conservation Service. And she's told me some stories about folks approaching her about trying to increase soil organic matter on rangeland by applying compost to the rangeland, or doing things where you take it and you spread it, you broadcast it out. And from what I gathered from her is that the feasibility of doing that is unfeasible. It's just such a large scale on rangeland. And so in that realm, it's best to work with Mother Nature, work with what's already going on, and working with the moisture that you're receiving, and focus your efforts in trying to, like I say, build that soil organic matter, build that soil health, so that you can hold on to moisture when it arrives. And another thing to think about is the amount of fossil fuels it would take to apply the compost. If you were to broadcast it or aerial drop it, or however it would be delivered, what is the benefit at that point in time? So on a large scale, like rangeland, I don't think there's I'm not aware of any good solutions there, but in a more managed, say a farm cropland situation, I think in that situation, it could absolutely be utilized. Of course, you are going to burn fossil fuels applying it, so, and also perhaps transporting it into the field. So that's where I really emphasize working with Mother Nature and working with what she has going on. But if there's a nearby source, a readily available source, like for example, a lot of dairy farms will like to transport their manure over onto the farm as a cheap source of fertilizer. But then unfortunately what happens there is the soil can become overburdened. You can't hold on to all that nitrogen and phosphorus, and that ends up leaching out into your water supply. So there's trade-offs.
I might just add, other states and locations, are far more sophisticated with this. I've got a good relationship that does that for a living in Vermont, and he's actually baffled that around the rest of the country that we're not focusing on this. I think it does come, we have to keep the scale and everything else in mind, as you pointed out, and that I don't think it's realistic to start necessarily composting programs that we're putting all oil everywhere on the farm ground. But things that go in the trash that could be building our soil health and resiliency. One of the big mistakes right now, and I think that deep dive this year that really start at a community level, community to community, to make that happen. And if you like more information, he is brilliant. But he'll talk to you for a really long time. Maybe he's
also, talk to you later about contact. Just along that general theme, I know, that Denver waste, for human waste is being applied out on fields, on the eastern part of Colorado. So that is actively being done right now. I know that's not exactly your compost, but it's
Steve did it in the eighties.
sorry.
For the human waste, Steve did it in the eighties.
Steamboat did it in the 80s.
My field, we had to stop it because the nitrates got too high.
There you go. There's great out there.
Yeah, I guess I'm just an optimist, and I think that, because we're not closing that loop, right? I mean, we're moving all this carbon matter to cities where we consume it, and then it doesn't go back, so we can change it. So, I mean, the optimist in me says, I want to Cisco or one of those larger cities have a program where so get another barrel that you have to do something with right at your house. But years ago, nobody wanted to do recycling, right? And commonality, what we have to do more people. And so the optimist in me said that, as that carbon resource becomes more less available, more programs will develop that will be able to monetize that return back to where it came from. The carbon footprint is a really good example. One of the programs that I've seen that is successful essentially integrate the available compost with like a community garden or a more local urban farm. There's nothing wrong with that. You've got to come take mine. I've got 3 barrels of stuff out back. But thanks for that. And also that's why we start really focusing on phrasing. Because effectively that's sort of like removing the full compost around and sort of real stuff. So it's integrated. Lauren, yes, what's your name?
My name is Dakota, and right on topic with the rotational grazing. I've heard a little bit about the virtual fences, and I'd be curious to hear a little bit more if you found some people locally to try this out as like a pilot. Because I've heard you need like cell tower, not cell towers, but GPS signals towers, and there's some grant funding that can help on those towers. And I don't know if there's talk of like, yeah, how those resources could potentially be shared with the community.
Thank you, Dakota. She sits on our city council, by the way. Thank you for your service. So excited that you asked that because there's a grant that I'm working on right now that's due in a couple weeks. And and that's my concept, is this virtual fencing. We're partnering with the Forest Service in purchasing, asking the Forest Service to purchase a few of these towers. They're about $13,000 a piece, and placing them on Forest Service land. And the demonstration project area would be up in North Route. Forest Service land is typically higher than private land in terms of elevation. And so those are the ideal locations to put those towers. And we have a couple of landowners who are interested in participating. And then other grant funds we use to purchase the collars for the cattle. They're about $45 a collar. Generally we lease them because the technology is advancing, and so it's best to just lease them. So if we can get some grant funds to cover the collars as well, and give it a couple of years, 3 years would probably be ideal, and see what kind of impact we can get. So my role with the conservation district is how can we grow and expand this coverage that these towers are creating. So it was neat, the company we're working with, they're called Fence. So like fence, take out the F, put in a V, Fence. So they found that they could strategically place about 5 towers in North Route. Actually, it might have only been 4 towers. They did about 75,000 acres worth of coverage with those towers. Now imagine if the district was able to go and write a grant and get additional funding for more towers and put those on private land, and we just keep expanding our coverage. And then, like I was saying, our friends to the south in Eagle County, they already have a program going on We could probably put a couple towers up on flat tops or near the flat tops, high elevation there, and get some extensive coverage and just eventually, hopefully cover all of Routt County. And then just keep going in all directions. Everybody I've talked to, there's interest in all the neighboring counties. So this is a hot topic, the virtual fencing. It's really exciting. And so I think we'll see a lot more growth.
Quick follow-up to that, is there an educational component to this new work being done to where somebody who wanted to get involved could understand kind of the best practice of rotational breathing? I know the smaller the space, almost the better, and the more often you move them, the better. So yeah, is there outreach, and then also is there like studies being done that can, well, not yet, but hopefully being done to showcase the effectiveness of the virtual fencing and the rotational grazing?
You know, I think the technology is so new that the studies are coming out, and the Eagle County project will be the first available information as it comes out. But our local expert, I would say, is our NRCS partner here, Clinton, about prescribed grazing. And one of the things the district does with NRCS is host field days to talk about these practices so that we can provide that education and outreach. Prescribed grazing is one of those practices, and Clinton can speak to this, that we have a lot of room for growth in developing, and part of that is the education piece. And also part of it is it's darn hard to fence a large ranch in a way that you can rotate your cattle through. Not to mention the fact you have wildlife moving over, and we don't want to impact them negatively. But Clinton, I'd love to be the.
Yeah, so probably with the fencing that the Forest Service and Conservation District is coming up with, an RCS with partner. And there's actually some HOAs out there too that are really great. With that, so they would partner to BLM and some land. That hopefully we could partner with to develop prescribed grazing plans that manage those HOAs, and they're not thrilled about having the grazing on it, but they need to have the grazing on it for gas. So it's pretty complex, but with those callers, there would probably be partnering with NRCS to develop prescribed grazing. Yeah, it's a pretty cool project that hopefully develops.
Yeah, I had a quick question here. Maybe I can direct this to you, Paul, and perhaps you as well, Patrick, if you're willing to weigh in here too. You could remind us, if you can, Mike, how long your family's been here too, in agriculture. I think, boy, we have the potential to make a great mistake here and assume that our producers and ranchers will just continue that. And I think it could be helpful for everybody here. Put some guardrails in. So what's your sense of adaptive capacity? You'll make alternative crops on the list.
Yeah, so one thing that I've experienced on the church is that if you have a meeting with your rancher or agriculture neighbor and tell them what they should do, or they have a good idea for what they should do, but the same idea because it doesn't tend to go over very well. And a lot of this in water communities sometimes ag a little bit picked on. I did tour last week on my family's place, and I was asked the question of with 40 million people looking at the lack of water supply, like that was a responsible thing to do. And we gave it the background, the production and all that, but it's also those water rights to back to 1987. The 40 million people come after that meadow was being irrigated, so I don't really think that started the problem. But with that being said, what we've also seen is that there are places where some of this innovation in crop switching makes sense based on local scarcity. If it continues to prove to be successful and other activities are watching it, you can clearly see their own personal benefit as well as the benefits from that participation. But I think it really is a matter of proving it. And it's not across the board. Every person, in the Colorado River Basin, I don't think should go change their practices to try and get the situation where it's appropriate and where we have opportunities to learn. I think that is important.
So, yeah, maybe I'll do another question a little bit. I'm sorry if it's super naive, but My sense is, spring's been coming a bit earlier in terms of runoff and hear about that sort of thing. And does that seems to be in the mountains of the Colorado, in terms of the growing season in some fashion? Like to what degree in the sense of how much days difference, or anything?
I knew all these numbers in May and June, Director Dunn just updated us on Tuesday, Rio Grande is this year, their hydrology peaks 1 month earlier than the historical average in the Rio Grande this year. And many places, on the west of Colorado, were similar, so I don't have the exact number for anything, but almost a month, and so that's great. One of the things that we can see that we've been in such depletion of soil moisture content the last bunch of years, that's been part of why that's impacted this period of quick. So with the rainier monsoon that a lot of us have experienced this year, we're hoping that some of this soil moisture go back, so it'll be interesting to monitor over time. There's certainly a scientific analysis, total temperature rise and all these things, but it's interesting to actually see on the ground. So as an ag role, we're bumping up as we're planning, or we're bumping everything up to these planning on the current.
Can I say one thing about the local Nampa thing though? We're still 59-day growing season here in Steamboat. Okay,
How many?
59. Okay, so we just had a frost a little bit a couple weeks ago, right? The first freeze, and the ice on the water, and the animals. That was early September. So we're still in that 59-day growing season. We're still getting those high variables of, temperature getting cold, 48-day swings. Our growing season is not increasing. The water's coming in sooner. The weeds are coming sooner. The grasses are still struggling because they're, getting froze at June 12th to September 15th. I mean, that's what we have here. It's a little bit longer down in Haiti. That hasn't changed. The water has. So just keep that in mind.
So it's like it's the freeze periods haven't necessarily changed, even though the
Yeah,
broader
it's,
temperature.
we'll get October here. I was one of the guys that planned last fall, November 8th, or I think it was actually 18th in the picture. I tried to do the cover crop November 8th. They got 50 degrees and then germinated the seed. And we had water too. So, that changed it. I'm probably one of the last few people in the county that actually done dirt work where we raised wheat, right? All these open things here are the old wheat fields. You could always just go plant in November and winter wheat come up great. Probably not now if we try to do it. Wow.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that Patrick brought that up, because when we did our, intensive research and study on the dry out of 2020, it was one of the drier, hotter summers on record. But we had 7 consecutive freeze days in Kremlin, Colorado, starting on August 7th. Yeah. Wow. So you really want to make Perry go to work and say, well, I'm sorry about all this data you have. 12 data loggers getting information every 15 minutes, but we're going to have to do it again. It's crazy.
Thank you.
Sure. What's your name? Texas. Question about irrigation practices in rainy season, compared against recreationists. We see here on the given when we have flow workers receiving this one more. The question is that I've heard on the recent taught a class here, it seems to be called river orientation. It really sort of students like, why are the ag users still irrigating, or are they still irrigating? We saw some standing water on some directions. And it was a great question. I didn't have the answers asked. Perhaps late season kind of post when they created a problem. We still put water on the land when the river may need it more in the water. Are you doing that for soil and root health, or just wondering about that?
So I don't think there's a better answer to that. If you harvest, we talked about the brand new spirit. So if you harvest early enough in the year and you have the ability to use water back on the meadow, those benefits can be great. In fact, Colorado State University was the creator of Foxdale Bears, and we planted in a lot of locations up here, we thought that Mars twice in the short row season. And so we see it firsthand, we're talking, we're in the meadow cutting, the first part of July, through the middle of July, and we're able to supply water back on, even if we're not cutting the second harvest, where we grow and forage, around like this. And then when you go to the regenerative side of the conversation, raise that appropriately, that's all that much more nutrient that we can put right back in the ground. So we have huge economic benefits to agriculture as well as soil. That being said, at some point in time of the year, putting this in water on meadows, we start to see pretty big plants aren't necessarily benefited from that process. Then it becomes a very interesting conversation about what we're practicing, what we're really doing. So I think if we look on it on location specific time of year, better, frankly, but not all irrigation is.
Not all producers do that, of course. The work I've done, the explanation I've gotten, that's the question. Is that some producers obviously are hedging their bets for the next season, so the soil is itself a reservoir, and it will store water. And so it's not always the best thing to do, because if you break your dormancy, the grass is laying deep and then burning up carbohydrates, it's rather have to be available in the spring. If you were to do that right, I'm not saying that the producer does it right or wrong, or they science it out or whatever, but if they actually are able to store soil in the fall or the winter, then they know they can go into the spring with water in the source, their greenhouse could be accelerated. As long as it's always about educating, that's what they're pretty sure.
And, I would just add there was something that, great farmers and ranchers are really thinking about that and the economic impacts. But it's something that I think we should all be diving deeper into about that, specifically based on the watershed conversations, and really get deeper as to total benefits for these otherwise. So.
Nathan, I think we're approaching the end of our panel here. I continue to ask questions, but I wanted to make sure the audience has the opportunity to ask questions. Go ahead, sir.
I just want to make a statement that, thank you for the agricultural community doing what you do to put food on the table. I don't think people respect that enough. Maybe it's getting better, but it was one of the memorable things for me in the first YBR. We had some agricultural community members speaking, and they were very passionate about that. It was something our society was always really connected to. And I just wanted to personally say that.
I appreciate that.
Comments to end on. Hey, thanks, guys. I know our panels will be around here for the rest of the day, at least for a bit. If you want to have more questions, thanks for being a great audience.
I have one quick little closing statement I'd like to say as well, that all landowners, whether you live in an apartment or whether you own a ranch, that all landowners must be mindful of the water cycle on their land, yard, garden, and that, you all have an opportunity to create a more healthy soil to optimize it. Here's my plug.